Magnus Carlsen has lost two second game in a row in a span of 3 days at the Tata Steel Masters. This time to the young Nodirbek Abdusattorov, his new rival. Nodirbek played a brilliant game. It was actually Magnus Carlsen who initiated the imbalance by sacrificing an exchange, and that will haunt him today and for some days for sure. This is from the last few moments of the game. It was a long game with 60 moves, and it ended in a queen endgame, which Nodirbek converted. In this video, you can see that the pawn has reached almost the end, and the black king has also reached towards the queen, towards the pawn, which means any further check can be blocked with a counter check. Magnus knows he's done and he resigns. And Nodirbek was just waiting for that. So let us have a look at this game. We will look at this game in three parts. First, the opening, moves 1 to 15, and it was an English opening which ended in an exchange sacrifice by the world champion. The second part of the game, the middle game, is that part where Abdusattorov just maintains his advantage and takes it till move 35, where it becomes a queen endgame. And then in the queen endgame, there are some chances for Magnus to draw, but Abdusattorov just converts it in 60 moves. So let us first see the opening. It was a quiet English c4, c5, symmetric, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, pawn e3, and e5. Bishop e2, and black gets the d5 break quickly, takes, and castles. Bishop e7, bishop b5. Takes and b takes. Queen c7, d4. So the tension in the center is completely gone because the pawns will get exchanged here. Takes, and bishop d7. Knight f3 and bishop f6 attacking the rook. This is where Magnus Carlsen decides to sacrifice an exchange. He plays bishop a3. In hindsight, this is very easy to consider as a mistake, right? Because this is what got him into troubled waters and he lost the game. The advantage of an extra rook, an extra exchange, just carried on till the queen endgame. So at this moment, when Magnus sacrificed the exchange, what was his logic? He had just lost a game in the previous round from Anish Giri. And now going here, it was very risky to go for this. But his thought is he's stopping black from castling. And if black castles long, after bishop takes, queen takes, castles, white will have rook c1, the two bishops, that is an advantage, and some sort of an attack on the castled king, which is on the queen side. This is Magnus's idea in going for the exchange sacrifice. So after bishop takes, queen takes, castles, Magnus plays rook c1. So two bishops and the pin. That's all he has for the exchange. King b8. Magnus plays in the same style. He sacrifices the exchange. He takes on g7. Normally, this would be very risky, but having said A, we should say B, right? So he sacrificed an exchange. Now he has to continue in the same style. He goes for the pawn. Nodirbek plays rook g8, and Magnus comes back. Taking the next pawn was very risky. If he takes here, then things like bishop g4, threatening to win a piece. And if you come back with the queen, then f5 comes. And then it becomes a big problem for your king side. So Magnus just goes back to b2, bishop g4 anyway, knight e1. So this is the second part, the middle game. The advantage for black just keeps getting maintained by Abdusattorov. Takes. He exchanges off the other pair of rooks, which makes it easier for this rook to make threats. Bishop f1, and now knight e5, h3, bishop f3. If knight takes, the knight jumps in and then it's mate on h2. So he cannot take it. He plays queen d4. And now rook d8 attacking the queen h4. So he's going for the h pawn now. Now that the two rooks are not there, there's just one rook. Taking the h pawn is not that big of a problem. Nodirbek just goes for bishop d5, allowing Magnus to take the pawn. Queen takes h7. His idea is he wants to exchange of more pieces. Bishop b2, and takes. Queen check, king goes back. So the a2 pawn will fall. In exchange for the h pawn, Nodirbek basically took the a pawn. So he's got two connected pass pawns. He can take it anytime. So Nodirbek plays knight c6 first. The knight was hanging. And now knight f3 and queen takes a2. Bishop f6, attacking the rook. Rook d1 check. King h2, pawn a5. The pawn starts to roll. So this is very difficult for white to hold, right? This pawn looks like it's unstoppable, along with the extra exchange that black has got. White's h pawn is nowhere close to promotion. Knight d4. So this is that moment where Magnus gets back the exchange, because now after knight d4, knight takes, bishop takes is not something that Magnus would mind, because his bishop would be very strong and the h pawn can start running. So Nodirbek goes for queen d5. And now Magnus plays queen c2, asking an uncomfortable question to the rook. If you go to a1, you lose, right? So the rook has to find some space here, which would be just too passive. So in effect, this is giving Magnus back the exchange, queen d6, pawn f4, and then Nodirbek gives back the exchange. But he is still up by a pawn. And this advantage now carries on to the endgame, the queen endgame. This is the position in the queen endgame. It is still a good advantage. Computer would probably win this as black, but it's difficult to win as a human because the h pawn also runs, right? So Magnus would have thought, I'm out of the woods. I'm still kind of safe. But Nodirbek plays brilliantly from here. The last part, pawn a4, queen a2 was played. The other option was just to push the pawn, in which case you're kind of in time, because if a3, h6, and queen b2, you can take, and pawn pushes. Promotes. Still uncomfortable, but queen a2 was played. Pawn f5 is going for the f4 push. h5, queen h8. So this is a big decision. He decides to give up the a pawn so that he can get the h pawn. So he goes for queen h8, queen takes, queen h5. And now king g1, and here comes queen f3. King h2, queen e2, king moves, and queen e5. King f2, and now b5, attacking the queen. Queen moves, the king comes up. So very good play. Pawn g4. Magnus himself goes to exchange of that last pair of pawns he had. Takes. Now the thing is very simple. It's a good advantage for black now, because the king is also coming up. Generally, in these kind of positions where you have queen and an extra pawn, your aim should be to bring the king up, because you can't win without the king coming up. The king has to come up so that when the other person gives a check, you can block with the counter check, or help the pawn forward with the king. So the chances of giving a counter check increases when your king comes further up onto the board, close to the queen. Of course, you don't want to lose to a skewer, but queen goes behind, the pawn pushes. King comes to f3, king comes forward. King comes to g2 and queen check. King moves, queen check. King moves, and now the pawn pushes. This is now completely gone. Queen check, the king gets in. Queen check, the king gets in. Queen check, king comes to d2. And now queen went back to h8. He did not give one more check, because if you give one more check, anyway, the king will come to c2 and then queen will block, and the checks would be over pretty soon. So he goes to h8, and now just king c2. Queen check, king moves to d1, and now queen went back again, and queen check, and the pawn reaches b2. So this is where Magnus Carlsen resigned to his straight second loss in a row at the Tata Steel Masters.